Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday with Fran. I am Shelley Kino, and Fran and Cooper are joining us today. I don't think Cooper was with us last week, if I
He hasn't
recall
been here in
correctly.
a while.
Yeah. So
Oh my
he,
goodness, this phone never
yeah.
rings except when you're on.
I think that happened last week too. That in the middle of
Uh-huh.
middle of our conversation, your phone
Oh,
went
I'm
off.
just gonna mute me and you talk.
Oh, all right. Well, so today it was my idea to talk about organization and how do you organize your life? How do you organize IEP documentation? And summer to me is one of the best times to do that because you're not having to frantically look for the paperwork. You can take your time with it. There's no pressure. You don't have a meeting tomorrow where you're trying to gather everything, or you don't have a meeting next week that you're trying to gather everything. And so I actually have an IEP binder that I put together, and I can help anybody put one of these together. I actually have like a whole list of things that I include in the binder, and then why you would want to put those things in there. And so one of the main reasons for doing that, I feel, is oftentimes, and I'll admit that I probably was guilty of this as a special education teacher. I don't go back 2 or 3 IEPs ago, B or C IEPs ago, and look at what goal or objectives we might have been working on then, or what level hey, Alex, welcome. It's been a long time since we've had you join us. It's so awesome to have you. Um, and, and so it's a good idea when the parents have the time for you to go back and say, okay, are we really making progress from this grade to this grade to this grade? And is it really in an upward direction, or, has it somehow stagnated somewhere? I've had a few meetings here recently with my clients where when the parent did that and brought it to the team's attention, the team was like, oh, yeah, wow, okay, we didn't realize that, and especially with all this COVID stuff, some of the stuff that had been in an IEP prior to COVID isn't accurate anymore. And so including and updating that information also, which then allowed for goals to be changed and things that were going to be worked on to be changed. So having that kind of information together that you can quickly gather it is super important. And Fran, do you want to tell them what you were doing before we went live?
Digging for all my IEPs? No, you mean looking? I was looking for information that I could reference. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Because I was trying to figure out the date that I had my daughter's when she was due for her annual review, and I think we actually missed it.
Yeah, from what you're saying, from what you've told me, it sounds like you have. And that's another thing with the deadlines. They're not supposed to be flexible. Deadlines are deadlines for a reason. And you had said that you thought that you had missed your daughter's annual review. And then you had told me that you had met in between when the current IEP went into action and when you thought you were due to have the annual review. And I had changed kind of my opinion on whether you had missed your deadline or not. But then based on that conversation, if nothing was changed, so when you think about the words annual review, so if you're going to review, you're supposed to look at the whole IEP and decide if, what isn't current, what needs to stay, what needs to go, is everything still appropriate for the child's needs? And you're supposed to look at all of that, and then you can call it an annual review. But based on what you told me, what happened in that interim meeting, I don't think that should have counted for an annual review. So that's something else, that sometimes there's a miscommunication. When you had that meeting, you said it wasn't marked as an annual review. And schools are supposed to tell you if, whatever the purpose of the meeting is, that's what they're supposed to tell you is going to happen ahead of time on that notification of conference. So if none of those things happened and nothing was changed on the IEP and no amendments or additional information, then yeah, you are probably past your due date for your annual review. But again, it's a communication. It could be a communication issue.
So I will address that at some point. It's and I guess that it lends itself to sometimes the paperwork you just feel buried and overwhelmed with just keeping track of it all. I do have a folder, and this is the folder I have right now set up that has all of my daughters that I carried into the IEP the meeting. So it has her guardianship papers in it. It has all of her missed school dates. It had any documentation that was current. And I think I have maybe this many IEPs in it back that I just keep in it.
Yeah.
So then I can just carry that in with me, and then I have that information. But I also, so what I'm going to finish what I was saying was, but keeping track of that and the dates, and it gets a little overwhelming sometimes. And sometimes it's frustrating because the communication, I think it comes down to the communication. There's sometimes the communication that's best for you is not what is being used.
Right. And that also is something that could be worked out with your school and talked about at the IEP meeting is, simple as is your preferred way to communicate with a phone call, by an email, hand delivered or mailed. And then, the frequency of it, is that communication going to happen for some students, especially students where they're really working on unwanted behaviors? Daily communication is not unheard of, but weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, more often than when the progress reports come out is also certainly something that is allowed to happen if it's discussed and if it's added into the IEP, that communication needs to happen more frequently.
And addressing the communication, my daughter has a co-guardian, and she was not being copied into all of our communication, even though we continually kept adding her back in. And so then I was having to forward everything. But I think we've resolved that part of the issue.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because I'm trying to think, maybe it's not as interesting as I think. Because I was thinking if it's a divorced couple, how, they don't have to, they're supposed to attempt to reach out, but if they have the majority of their contact is with just one parent, or they've heard from the other parent, don't bother me, I'm not involved in this or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if I would think
a
guardianship
we have requested and actually required that all communication concerning my daughter involves everyone, both of the guardians. So any communication from the school is supposed to go to both of us.
Yeah, and that's probably,
and it's written in the IEP.
Yeah, and that's probably not intentionally being left out. It's probably, again, a communication, like you said, of everybody remembering, hey, when we message Fran, we also have to message this person. Because in a lot of situations, even, in couples that are under the same roof, you typically don't, I never did. Well, I shouldn't say never did, but I'd often just communicate with the one who more often attended the meetings, which, right or wrong, tended to be mom. I did have a few dads that attended one or two meetings over the years, but for the most part, it was it was mom that attended. And so most of my communication, I mean, of course, when I would address letters, it would be, if they both lived under the same roof, or if I knew, that the parents were divorced, but they both wanted the information, I would try to remember, but I can't say that I was perfect at it. But yeah, just, I think that might be one of those things where that communication of that constant, hey, remember, we've asked and it's in the IEP now that so-and-so is also included. And please make sure, because it shouldn't be on your shoulders to have to forward everything. I'm trying to think how the law is worded on that.
With the latest technology and the way it's set up within when you sign up for school, you can have multiple email addresses for communication to be sent. And so they're both listed.
Yeah, well then. And if it's, so that's a little bit different, at least it has been in my experience. So that sort of stuff gets kept in the main office. It didn't always get transferred to me as the special education teacher, and it didn't always get transferred out to the gen ed teachers that, hey, when you send out information, you're supposed to send it out to all these people. However, because you've said that you've had it included in the IEP, that's a little bit different.
And this has been this many, all the calendars. So it's, I understood it, this calendar and part of this calendar, but this calendar, no.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it gets frustrating. Yeah. Cause it's like, well, how many times do I have to tell you, because we both know if that was a student that was doing it over and over again, and, that student would have a detention by now. So, so put the school team in detention.
And I understand that and I don't want it to seem that I don't have compassion or understanding, because I know the teachers have multiple students and they deal with multiple families and different circumstances. However, after a while, what it actually tells me is you don't care enough to notate it in such a way or to remember. You don't respect and value my child.
Yeah. And that's the message that you receive. I don't know if that's definitely the message that's being sent, but that certainly is, that's how I would feel.
So, and yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, just make a note of it. Like, okay, on this person's file, or stick it on the computer monitor or next to the computer. When you email this address, you also email this address. When you send something, you send it to this address and this address. I mean, I don't know.
Anyway, back to organization.
That's part of the organization. That's an organizational skill of the school.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, it sort of seemed like a rabbit hole, but it's still connected.
So you were talking about your binder with all your stuff in it.
Yep.
Let's line them up and let's see what you say and I say.
Okay. So in the binder, I have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. I have J numbers of tabs. Okay, so I have 10 tabs for anybody who doesn't correlate J with 10. And in those tabs, it is general information. So like the first tab is contact lists of who to contact. So for you as the parent, like if I have a question about attendance issues, do I call the special ed teacher, or do I call the district office, or do I call the building principal, or who do I call? That kind of contact information. Then it's student synopsis, like what are my child's strengths? What are my child's deficit areas? What do I want for my child to be working on? And then I said child's strengths and weaknesses. Then the next tab is, and then whenever you get a binder kit from me, you get that. So like I don't give you the tabs in the binder, but I give you like a summary sheet of what to work on and kind of for each of these categories. Then the next, so do you have that kind of stuff in your setup?
I don't have tabs because I just have a
The
pocket
folder,
folder.
right?
So do I have it? Yes, I have a sheet that has contact information on it. I
Okay.
have I have their strengths and weak. I have their progress reports in there.
Okay, that's in a different section
Okay.
for me, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the second section that I have is communication. So all the communication that you have had with the school, copies of the emails, copies of when you had phone calls, who you talked to, a kind of a summary of what the conversation was about.
Okay.
And then the next section, section C, would be the current IEP. And then you just have the full, you wouldn't have to have the full IEP because some pages you don't necessarily, like the notification of conference or the documentation of not documentation. What's that page called? Recommendations from the IEP meeting, that page. You might not necessarily have to put that in this particular binder, but so all the IEP information, the goals, the accommodations, the modifications, any notes that were taken, any support plans, and then tips for prepping for the next IEP are also included as part of my kit that is available through me. Trying to see where's my example of that. And then you also want to have, so I think you have that, right? You have the IEP and you have the full thing. So you have all that stuff in there.
Oh, can I say something?
Of course.
If I don't have it in here, though, something that I've taken to doing because I don't always have paperwork, and it's just they get thick. And when I had both kids, I scan everything in, and then I have it on my Google Drive. So I actually have access to like all of their IEPs digitally. I can pull them up right then. So I do have, if I don't have it in the folder, I probably have it digitally scanned.
Right. And the reason, and that's a good idea. The reason to have it in the binder and have it at your fingertips is when you take it into the meeting and you say, well, remember that conversation that we had, and then you can flip in your folder, in your binder, it was on such and such a day. We talked by phone or whatever. So let's see.
So you're talking about communication and phone. So do you have your parents write down like a summary if they have a phone call with a teacher or with the school district?
Yes. Yep. And I also, and the way that I tell them to do that, and funny story. Remember I was telling you about the situation I have going on with the school prior to us coming on the air? We have been documenting every conversation. And then this is exactly what I recommend to all my parents is when you've had a phone conversation, or even if you've had a face-to-face or a virtual kind of a meeting, that you send a recap of that meeting in an email. And you then say, do I have all of this right? Am I understanding everything? Is this your understanding? If not, please let me know in an email. And then that is a record that you have that if there was, no response to that, then you assume that you got everything correct.
And even if you didn't, you are recording that you had this phone conversation,
right?
And you have it in a digital file.
Right.
We do that much the same with the caregivers, with our communications with facilities, because we were finding they would call, so there was no record.
Yeah, and in the somewhere I have it. I'm trying to see where mine is really quick, but yeah, just I used, and even for myself as a teacher, I had a binder that was just parent contacts. And every time we talked on the phone or I got an email, especially if we talked on the phone, then I'd write down the time, the date, and the summary. So that way, because we can't always remember 3 weeks, 3 months, down the way, what we talked about. So just by having to recall it, if we have it written down somewhere, then that has actually, we've made a different type of connection to that. And so then we're able to recall more of the conversation. And then also, that's again, documentation that I know we had this meeting.
Right.
And so for myself as a teacher, I needed to have that, like, for my own protection, my own memory, my own accountability, but also when I was evaluated so that I could say, look, I've had all these conversations, all these different communication times with all the parents of my students. So, that's for any teachers that are watching, is to make sure that you're doing something like that as well. Another section that I have for the binder kit is historical documents, is what I call it. So that's your report cards, your progress reports, any work samples from your child, any previous IEPs. I typically don't recommend more than 2 previous IEPs, but always know where the remaining ones are. Just because.
So how long do you say a parent should keep? How far back does a parent need to keep their IEPs? Forever?
I think at least 5 years worth. And I'm trying to think what the statute of limitations on filing a due process is. I think it's B, or I mean it's either C or E, full around all the calendars. So 3 to 5 years. I think it's 3 or 5 years that you have to file that your child didn't get what they were supposed to get.
Okay.
And that's why I say to have at least, the previous 2 in the binder, because then you can say, well, on this previous one, they were working on this goal and, they only mastered it at whatever percent, they didn't achieve it at their mastery levels, what I'm trying to say. And then any kind of medical information, like medicines, how often they take them, what the medicines are, any surgeries or hospitalizations or doctor's visits, because sometimes.
So I have a medical folder that I carry for myself and my kids, their appointments, and it has their med list, and it has her surgery list, and it has her allergies and things like that. But prior to the IEP, I would email the school nurse with her updated med list so that she could already have it inputted in the IEP, so they weren't trying to do that during the meeting.
Yeah, and that's awesome, because that is something that is one of those processes that you can take care of ahead of time, because most likely it isn't going to change between the time you send it and the time of the actual meeting. And if it does, it's maybe only going to be one change versus, some kiddos I know are on, 5 and 6 different medicines. And if you're having to write all those out and then having to write out how many times a day and what the dosage is, that's a little bit of a time saver. So that was awesome. And then I also have, I've attached for my binder kit a lot of acronyms that educators use and what they mean. And so that way, if something is said, or if you're looking at the IEP later and you come across an acronym, it might be listed in the back, and you won't have to go contact the teacher and say, hey, I don't know what this means. What does this mean? But I'm still not going to catch every acronym, because every district uses acronyms differently. And when I go to meetings, I often stop the meeting and say, I don't know what SRI stands for, or whatever,
So, I'm sorry. So if someone's interested in this binder about what you're speaking, they can just reach out to you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I'll even, I can come out and help. Well, I say I can come out. If you're in my area, I can come out and help. But some of the other tabs that I mentioned that aren't specifically listed here that I talked about are things like, I talked about the sample work, but any behavior notes. So again, if you have a child who has some unwanted behaviors that the school is working on, or even if they're not working on them yet, but you're just trying to keep track of them, so that at the next IEP meeting, you can say, my child did this. and then however many times between when you started tracking it and that day, and to give them an idea. But there was, I think, a couple things that I talked about: the parent and school communication. Trying to see what's behind it. Oh, in your parent rights, make sure that your binder has a copy of your parent rights and procedural safeguards.
I always leave them on the table though, because I'm so tired of all of them.
The only thing that I would suggest is just to make sure that you have the most updated version.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you have, I think the last updated version in Illinois was this many years ago. So if you have that one, then yeah, you don't need to continue to kill trees and have them.
Oh, I want to say something before I forget.
Okay.
As I was thinking, because about parent rights, because when my daughter became an adult age, all of a sudden they said that because I wasn't her guardian yet, that they didn't need to communicate with me anymore, which was true.
Right.
So, but they failed to say, but there's paperwork that you can have her sign. So, yeah. But I knew that there was a way, and it took me a lot of chasing and Googling, et cetera, to find the paperwork and get it signed. And then I did what I had told the school not to do. I sent it in with my daughter, expecting her to hand it in. And so it took a little bit of, finally I scanned it and sent it in an email. And they're like, oh, okay, well, yes, we will include you now. But it took me knowing about that. And if I hadn't known, they were not going to include me in any of it. So I want people to know that just because your child ages to adult, what is that age?
18.
You still can be involved if your child is willing and wants you there. And my daughter wanted me there. It wasn't that I was forcing my way in. I said, do you want me still involved? Yeah, I do. So I said, well, then you just need to sign this. And
yeah, it's called the transfer of rights paperwork.
Thank you. I just couldn't think of the name. I was like, I don't know what the name is. But
yeah, it's and that would be another thing if you're at that stage, to make sure that you have guardianship papers, copies of them, not your originals, but that those are within your binder. And like you said, you keep those in your folder. And anything where somebody might be able to question your authority to do something, that would be a good thing to have in your binder. One of the organizations that I looked to had suggested putting standardized tests in. And I see that as a good thing, because you can then refer back to those and say, well, B years ago, their standardized score was like here, and now we're only here. Or maybe it was here and we're just slightly above that, and just have that conversation about, why is that? Is that my child, just doesn't test well? Or, what other data do you have to show what my child is doing and how my child is progressing? Because as we also mentioned before we came on air, extended school year is something that a lot of parents don't know about. And schools in this area, honestly, do a really poor job of talking about it at the IEP meetings. And extended school year is not the same as summer school. Extended school year is anything beyond the typical school day. It can happen in the summer, but it can also happen on Christmas break or spring break, if it's necessary and if it's appropriate. And those are the words that are the tricky words to get a school and a parent to necessarily see eye to eye.
Yes.
But yeah, that's another one of those things. I mean,
that's where having your documentation is important.
Yep. Yeah. And understanding, as in the particular case that I am dealing with right now, what are the school's criteria? Ask them at the very front part of the school year, what are your criteria for extended school year? I want to know what I need to look at in order to know if my child is meeting or not meeting the criteria. It's not the same as summer school. Extended school year is individualized. It's based more on their IEP. It's very different than a summer school program that is a certain number of weeks for a certain number of hours at a time. And it's all kids go get the same instruction. And as far as I can recall, I have never had a student magically, somehow, nobody ever qualified for extended school year. It's supposed to be discussed at the annual review at a minimum. And it's supposed to be documented within the IEP, specifically in Illinois. I can't guarantee that is in the IEPs everywhere, but I believe according to the law, it has to be. I'm not a lawyer, so I, can't say that for certain, but as my understanding, it has to be discussed, and then it has to be stated that it was discussed and why the child was found eligible, and therefore what the program will be, or why the child was found ineligible and the data that was used to determine that the child is found ineligible. And it's supposed to be an actual conversation, not just oh, everything's good. We don't need ESY.
Right. My son actually qualified for it and got it a few years.
Awesome.
But I'm laughing about I was looking for it in my paper because it's literally here. There's a checkbox in it where if they extended school year services are needed. Yes or no. And then it gives minutes. But he qualified for that. But way back in the beginning, I'm laughing because I look at this now and I'm like, man, I really, really wish I had a better grasp and understanding of how to advocate for my son, because he had Down syndrome. He has Down syndrome. One of the key benchmarks is they have no fine motor skills. They stink. He could and they, in almost every school district, they qualify for occupational therapy without a problem. He was evaluated, and the reason he didn't receive occupational therapy was he was too immature, would not benefit from it. That's what I was told. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was told. But this was when he was evaluated, and this was that experience about which I've spoken many times, transitioning from early intervention into early childhood, and they did all the evaluations in a day, and then that was the day he went from having a developmental delay to mental retardation. So that was, there was that flip, and that was devastating because I had never used those words, and so that was really hard on me, just the terminology. And then so we had sat there all day. He was hungry, he was crabby, and then they're telling me all these things. This was all crammed into a day. So I didn't know how to advocate at that point. And then and I was just like, can you really do that? So I started speaking with other parents of children with Down syndrome and said, does your child qualify? Do you have a problem with this? And I found out, no, we didn't do it automatically, So knowing, and I think that's the benefit of today with all the social media and resources, is there are the parenting groups there. And I mean, like we have people like you who can coach us and walk us. Sorry, my cat is on the desk.
That's okay.
That's a tail you keep seeing.
Emmy is
biting me.
It's to be on camera.
Yeah, and she's biting me right now. Can you see her?
Oh, yeah.
Stop. So anyway, but so we have that benefit of those resources, and don't be embarrassed, ashamed, or feel like you're a failure because you're reaching out for help, because that's the whole point.
Right.
Knowing that you don't know it, so it's okay you're stronger using your resources than going, oh, I'll just do it myself. You're failing your child if you will not use the resources available.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I talk about my coaching services just like if you know, are in a sport or you're playing a musical instrument or you're, you know, you just want to get better at something that you do, cooking, whatever. You find somebody to help you hone your skills.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be that there's a bad scenario. You can, I mean, how many professional athletes and, you know, professional actors and actresses have coaches?
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of them, because they're always trying to stay at the
Personal
top of their game.
trainers. Yeah.
Yeah, or personal trainers. And so it's not that there has to be a bad situation. I would actually prefer to come in when it's not a bad situation because I feel like I'm behind the eight ball, so to speak, if I come in and it's a bad situation before I get
Right.
there. Um, but yeah, you know, and like you said, finding those groups, you have to be careful. This is just my own opinion. Um, and I was thinking this as you were talking about your son and reaching out to other parents, because just as your child is an individual and you want the school to look at your individual child, just because somebody else has something,
Doesn't
I
mean.
want to warn people to not automatically think, well,
Right.
because child A has it, well, then child B should get it too, because that's not necessarily the case. It has to be what's appropriate for child
For
A and child B.
right. And it
And
wasn't that I was looking for, but and also these parents to whom I was speaking, we've been together since our children were babies.
right.
So it was a group of parents that have been, I don't know, somehow we all got connected when they were all, I mean, they were babies and they
Yeah.
grew up together in this support group.
Oh,
So, but I also knew, I mean, I know that they each of our children have gone on to do many different things.
mm-hmm.
Some are working regular jobs, and some are not working at all, and because they are individuals. Just
Right.
because you have Down syndrome does not mean you're always loving, does not mean you're always
Right.
nice and gentle and whatever. But
Right. And on the flip
so
side, it doesn't mean that you always have a lower ability or lower fine motor skills or,
mhm,
you know, the some of the other physical characteristics. Like you don't always have to have the closer eyes or the further. I get all those. I apologize. I'll be very honest. When I took my testing for my license, that was the area where I scored the lowest, was being able to identify by characteristics written in a question what somebody's diagnosis would be. And I was like, I don't care what I care what their diagnosis is, but that's not who that person is.
right.
You know, I want to know who the
That
person
doesn't
is.
define who they are.
Right. And it's not necessarily going to define what strategies I would use or what accommodations I would provide or, you know, what level. So yeah, I did very poorly in that part of the test. So yeah, so whether it's the closer eyes or the further apart eyes and some of the other, you know, the saying has
It's
been
the
about,
epiphyseal, it's the eye fold is what Down syndrome
okay,
has, unless they have a mosaic type of trisomy 21.
right. And, you know, the saying has been around for people with autism that if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. And that's the same thing with every human being on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you know one redhead, you know one redhead. I mean, that doesn't mean that we're all the same. If you know one person with glasses, you know one person with glasses. I mean, that's how I look at it. It's a piece of the puzzle of who the person is. It's not that, like you said, not the defining part of the person.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, I'm getting a little preachy today.
I think we're both on
You're
Alex
right,
was,
Alex. We are all unique.
yes. I think you and I are both, we have some things going on, and they have fired us up.
Yes.
But I think what's important to do when we have a fire is to use it wisely,
Mm-hmm.
and to know, even so you're on fire about something that's occurring, and you have to meet with the IEP team. if you go in there with all your guns drawn, and well, maybe we're not allowed to use those words now, with
Yeah, we
all
might be censored now.
uh, oh, sorry, with
Yeah, I know what
with
you meant. Yeah,
if you go in there,
all cylinders firing, ready to.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, instead of going in there with, yes, I know what I'm desiring out of this, but having an openness to hear what the other side has to say. And I
right,
think that not only applies to the parents and anyone going in to help on from the student side, but also from the school side, that there needs to be a genuine teamwork approach,
yeah,
because it is a team and everyone's in it, should be in it ultimately for the student, because the student is the one that should be leading that meeting, whether through the things they've achieved or haven't achieved and tested, or by verbally leading the meeting.
right. Thank you, Alex, for balance. It's definitely true. And yeah, and I find myself in this particular situation that I've hinted about today and told you about prior. Um, and in some other situations, making sure that it's not, well, I think this is the way it should be, and therefore it should be, and it becomes a pride issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the parent of that child. So, I could see how that would be a very difficult situation for parents to be in too. Of like, I don't understand why you don't want to help my child, because that's how the parent is looking at this, and that's how the parent looks at a lot of situations, at least the parents that I've dealt with. It's like, I feel like I'm not asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars. I'm just asking for a grain of sand. And the school doesn't even seem willing to do the grain of sand.
Right.
um, and I actually, I was talking to somebody recently, and neither of us have children that learn differently, but we both have worked in the field. And she and I were talking, and she said, she says, why do you think that there's such a trust issue between parents and school districts? And because I had posted a question on my Facebook page and in my Facebook group of, if you could ask your IEP team any question you wanted to ask with the 100% assurance that it would be answered honestly, what would you ask? And the underlying idea behind each of the questions that was posted was a trust issue. And I said, I don't know the exact reason. My guesses are that there's a lot of misinformation out there. So, somebody says, well, I got this for my kid, or you should get this for your kid, or this is the right way to do it. And then a family goes in and that's not the case for their child. And that's not how their school district operates. And so they don't get it. And so that's broken the trust because, well, family A got it, I should get it. And there's there have been bad situations for families, where the school district really did do something wrong, or they really did do
Mm-hmm.
something hopefully unintentionally harmful, but it was harmful. So you have that. And I said, and then the other thing that I think is the fact that for many families, from the moment their child is born, and some families, even while they're pregnant, they're defending their child. They're defending their child's right to be alive. They're defending their child's right to be at a playground. They're defending their child because they're getting looks. People are saying things. Doctors and people are telling them, you can't, your child won't, your child isn't going to. So I think that that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know though. I don't live the life.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Sorry, I can't see you. My cat's standing in front of the monitor. She's really helping out today here. Um, and you had said something else, and I was trying to hold on to it so I could remember. Sorry, cat
That's okay.
distracted me. The tail
That's okay.
flying through. But it brought back, as you were just sharing and sharing about fighting for your rights for your kids. Um, it's so frustrating sometimes because my son, he has Down syndrome, so he looks different,
Hmm.
and so his behaviors are or uniqueness is accepted much more easily than my daughter's, who is more similar than different in looks. So people are more understanding of his differences than they are of my
Right.
daughter's. And
Right.
so they hold her to a standard that um, they don't hold my son.
Right.
And so she has a rougher road, I feel like, a lot of times than he does.
Yep.
Not in life, in with her teachers, in the educational field, um, in just even sometimes navigating with her peers.
Yeah.
So,
And I will speak to that from a cousin's perspective. I have a cousin who I didn't see very often growing up. And when I would see him at a family gathering, um, he didn't look, he had more of an appearance like your daughter. It wasn't obvious like with your son. And so we would kind of forget that he had some differences
mhm,
until a behavior would happen. And then it would be like, well, why is he? Oh, right.
right.
And our sometimes our initial reactions, and unfortunately
Ouch.
sometimes people's only reactions were, well, he should know better and he should do better and he's old enough to know, blah 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 blah. And they would get really angry with him and never remember that he learned differently than they did, and at a different
Mhm,
rate, and at a different level. um, and yeah, so I think, and I saw that, and I think maybe that's partially why the book was so important to me, because that was a big lesson that I learned in my teaching career, because I had a group of students that had physical appearance of, there's something very unique about me. But then I had others who didn't have that physical appearance of their uniqueness. And the school had
mhm,
a completely different approach to those two different groups. And it was exactly what you said. It was the teachers, it was the other students. Hi, Mom.
hey,
And
mom.
it was very eye opening to me
Mhm,
when that realization happened of, yeah, my kiddos who have ADHD or autism or learning disability or a behavioral problem, they are held to a higher standard. And I think it's just because, that out of sight, out of mind. I think that was what happened to a lot of teachers and a lot of their classmates is, well, I don't see it when I look at you.
mhm,
So I forget until you have a certain behavior or you have a certain thing that you do with your assignments or whatever. So each situation is unique and you shouldn't compare, but fight for what is right in your situation. I absolutely agree with that. Do you want me to
that
share
is
this
so true.
picture, I'm presuming?
Yeah, I was just gonna share because I just thought it was really cool. Um, my kiddos.
Yeah.
This was just the other day. We were swimming.
Is this when you did J laps?
There. No,
Okay.
it was another day.
Oh, okay.
But um, that's because I just, we've talked about them and I haven't shared a picture of them in a while, so I
Yeah.
just have a pair. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
But
I
oh my
love to see
goodness
your kid.
gracious, my computer's trying to restart in the middle of this.
That
Let's not do
could
that.
be bad. I don't want to talk to myself.
You don't want to talk to yourself?
Not really. I do
Oh,
enough of
okay.
that. Well, wait, did I just admit that?
But do you have arguments with yourself?
Well, sometimes I argue with my boss, and then it's just, I mean, you know, which is also me. So yeah.
Yeah. So I tell people I'm having a staff meeting, and if
Yes,
they wonder, and
exactly.
you're welcome to sit in, but who knows where we'll go, because they're not always pleasant.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah.
So
Or the other joke of, well, yeah, of course I talk to myself. I need somebody who has a level like mine who understands what I'm saying.
that's great. So I want to try to figure out, summarize, recap. That's the word. Recap what we've said. Gather what
Good luck
is
with
in. Thanks. Gather the paper. Thanks, Alex. Gather what is important. Gather your paperwork that you need to be able to present what is important for your child to the IEP team.
Yep.
That's the summary, I think, of what I try to put in the folder, is anything I think I might need to advocate to get what they need for their services. Oh, I know what I was going to say earlier. Remember when I lost the wording and I couldn't think of it?
Yeah.
Or the thought process? Okay, so there are certain things I really feel are important for my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and that should be in her IEP, and that we should be pushing. But my daughter is an adult, and there are some things that she really doesn't think is important. And so I have had to, within the last B IEPs, she and I sit and talk with her co-guardian,
Mm-hmm.
and we come together in agreement with her. And there are some things we don't agree on, but we know they're important. And we tell her, we're still going to ask for this because this is important for your future.
Right.
And because we want the best for you, we're still going to ask for this. And she understands that. But there are some things that I used to really, really want for her, and she really, really doesn't. And so that's not fair to her,
Right.
because that's my desire for her. That's not her desire. And
Right.
I want her to get the most out of her education as possible before she ages out.
Yep.
And so I've had to reassess and reboot what I think is important, to line up what she thinks is important and she desires out of the rest of her education. So that's what I was trying to say and
And that
forgot.
is so very awesome that you can recognize that and you can accept that. And to include any child who is able and willing, they're always allowed at the IEP meeting. And their input really should be considered, if at all possible, that they can give input.
Isn't
Now,
there a certain age they're supposed to be there?
There is a certain age that they're supposed to be there. But if you have a younger child than that age, which is in Illinois, we start doing that at, let's see, J is 10.
You can just say it for everybody else. It doesn't
14
matter
and
to
a
me.
half. So that's like between M and N. And
I like M&Ms, but I don't know about M&Ms. Sorry. Yay.
So yeah, at age 14 and a half, we write the IEPs. So if an IEP is going to be in effect when the child turns 14 and a half, we start including those, the children as much as possible. And then by age 16, they absolutely are supposed to be included at the meetings. And
I think my son, from the time he was in grade school,
yeah.
Once he was out of early childhood, he was in all the IEP meetings.
Yeah. And I think it's probably helpful, even if the child doesn't speak, to have the child there, because then it's very obvious who you're all there for,
Right.
And I think there might tend to be less raised voices, because the student would be there.
Even prior to him attending, I always brought a big old picture and I plunked that right in the middle of the table. That was the thing that I put on the table as soon as I walked in. I'd set it up. I'd say, here's Luke, in case anyone doesn't know.
Yeah.
If you've
Yep.
never met my son, here he is.
Right. And that's
Oh,
that's something that I have suggested to families over the years too, is, he's not or she's not just a number,
mhm.
and it's
I think I
easy.
commented that on your thing.
Yeah, you did. And he or she is important, and it's not about my pride or my win or my loss. It's about what is appropriate for the child. It's not supposed to be. And I often had to remind myself of this when I would get told, through an IEP meeting that, hey, this kid is going to need this accommodation or this
Mhm,
modification, and that would require a lot more work on my part. I'd have to tell myself, it's not about you, Shelley. This is what the kid needs. It's not the kid's fault. Don't be mad at the kid
mhm.
because they
Ellie,
need
stop.
this.
Mhm,
But this is what you've signed up to do as his teacher or as her teacher.
mhm,
And, so I can't imagine that I'm the only teacher ever to have that thought. Um, I just hope that if I'm not the only person, that those other people have those other thoughts that I had of, it's not about me. It's the extra work is because this kid needs it. It's not their fault.
mhm.
And yeah, and that's one other tab that I have in my binder is like, if you, again, this wouldn't specifically pertain to the IEP, but, like paying for school fees, paying for lunches, any extracurricular activities, it's a good idea to have that information too, because you never know, something might come up at a meeting sometime. And so having those invoices and those receipts of, yeah, I paid for that book order, give my child their books, or, yeah, I paid for them to go on the field trip, they should be allowed to go on, or whatever, whatever
Mhm.
those kinds of things, those fees and whatnot would be. Um, Something else that, that others that I have looked to have suggested be into these IEP binders. So yeah, I have my email address up on the corner now. If anyone is interested in getting my IEP binder kit, just email me, and I can get that out to you. At one time I charged for it, but I think I've made it a free offer now. It's free to somebody who's watching today. So
So that's
even if it
yeah.
would be something that I'm charging normally, you can have it for free if you reference that you saw this in Friday with Fran and you tell me the date that you saw it, because then I'll know that you really did watch this episode and you had to watch it pretty much all the way through in order to get to this part. So
Oh, oh, so mom, you argue and you win
yeah,
with
she
yourself.
argues with
I love
herself
that.
all the time and she wins most of the time. I would hope so, because if you lose when you're arguing with yourself, then there's a real problem.
Well, actually, I do. I lose a lot of times
Do you when
because
you're talking to yourself?
and then I end up putting myself in timeout because we're just the argument is spiraling downhill. So we just go in timeout and everyone is not allowed to communicate and you just gotta be quiet and that's how
Huh.
it ends. Yeah,
I need to start putting myself in timeout
it's
in the
amazing what
mountains,
happens.
in a cabin, and far,
Yeah,
far away.
I know. I'm thinking about another time out about going camping again because man, I have that has become my place of peace and rest and
Yeah.
refreshing.
Yeah. I believe I have every intention of being with you next time that we're scheduled to be together. But I will be on my way to my break.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I think Kevin has a doctor's appointment in the morning. So we might not leave yet by the time it's our turn.
Okay.
I'll have to see. But like I said, hopefully it'll all work. But speaking of, it is time for us to wrap up for
Oh,
today.
okay.
And so, yeah, if you want the organizational binder IEP organization kit, let me know. And you can have it for free if you reference this time of Friday with Fran. And we will both see you next week. Alex, have fun in timeout. Bye bye.
Bye.